morning, everybody, and welcome to the NAAHL Policy and Practice Conference, New Ways Forward. We have an action-packed day, maybe not action-packed, but a packed agenda with lots of speakers and content, and I know that this is not going to surprise you, but one of our senators is running late, so we've got a little bit of a shift in the agenda. Thank you very much for all being here. Thank you to our conference sponsors, especially JPMorgan Chase, this year's lead. Little preview of the day. We're delighted to have two keynotes, Senators Ben Cardin and Todd Young, who will tell us about some new legislation that they are sponsoring and how that may be able to help the communities and the people that we care about. We'll hear from our new national, or relatively new, national CDFI leaders from Enterprise, LISC, OFN, and Raza. We have a panel on the incredible climate opportunity and the giant influx of resources that may be available to communities and for affordable housing. We have a panel talking about preservation of affordable housing. I know we've all heard this a lot before, but doing it at scale and how this is becoming increasingly important for our communities. And in the afternoon, we've got dive deeply into CRA, so please caffeinate at lunch. So that we can be sure to have that. We've got first the three banking principals who will talk to us about the reg. We will deep dive in with their staffs. And finally, we will have CRA stakeholders sort of respond about what they think that means for their institutions and communities. And then our closing speaker of the day is NAAHL's wonderful CEO, Buzz Roberts, who will give us some reflections on his 40 years in the field. So let me introduce our first panel.
Good morning. So we're going to do something a little different today. We hope to have a conversation with our panelists about the events of the day and what brings them here today. When the senator arrives, we'll take a pause and then we'll resume, and then we may take another pause and resume. So we'll have fun with that. But let me just jump right into it. So this is an incredible group of leaders, and they all have very rich experience that they're bringing to their new positions, but they're fairly new in these roles. And so I'd like to just start us off by saying what brought you to your role today, and I'll propose, I feel like we may be at an inflection point for CDFIs at this moment. It'd be interesting to know whether or not you agree or disagree with that. So we'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Michael Pugh. I am the CEO for Local Initiative Support Corporation LISC, and I'm approaching my 5th week now there. So the world is still spinning quite a bit. Thank you. What I would offer to you is that I spent, Reader's Digest version, about 30 years of my career in financial services. The first 20 years were at 2 of the largest banks in our country, running different lines of business. And then I discovered this amazing thing called CDFIs. Of course, we all know what CDFIs are. And through a discussion at the time with a leader that was at the Carver Federal Savings Bank, I was encouraged to join Carver. Now, Carver happens to be a MDI, a minority deposit institution, and a CDFI, and it's one of very few of its kind. There are about 150 MDIs across our country, but in a very unique position because it's a publicly traded financial institution that also has this really important mission. What I quickly learned was that the power of actually helping everyday Americans and small businesses while using financial services is extraordinarily rewarding. The ability to do it and have a platform, a voice, and a real opportunity to see lives become transformed. I found my purpose. I knew I wanted to be a part of the CDFI space. Millions of dollars were deployed, and lives, I believe, were positively impacted. And I had the privilege of being at the head of the shop and could go home and be what I felt was a good example for my family by talking about financial services for good and showing real examples. So when the opportunity was presented to join LISC and do more of the same at a national scale, well, how do you say no to that? And I would say that what has led me here is really purpose and the ability to do something that matters to others.
And do you feel like CDFIs are at an inflection point?
Yeah, so I do. I believe that there is an inflection point. I think that as we consider some of the most important changes that have taken place, affirmative action being one critical aspect when we think about post-COVID, post-George Floyd, as an example of some of the racial injustices that have happened in our nation. CDFIs were sought after and have been seen as a conduit to help support economic development and to perhaps in their own way play a role in level setting for some of what we've seen as injustices in the past. However, I think that given the current economic environment and where we are, some of that is at a critical inflection point that we'll have to continue to monitor and advocate for.
Thank you. Harold.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? There we go. Yeah, that is loud. There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. Harold Pettigrew, CEO for the Opportunity Finance Network. Michael has me beat. I'm 5 months in. But no, for the next 2 to 3 years, I will still say I'm the new CEO for the Opportunity Finance Network. Pleasure to be with you all here this morning. You know, my path was a little unconventional. I'm an urban planner by training. And, you know, so it's, I said a couple claps of thanks, Shaun, you know. And so, you know, much of my career has been spent really in the economic development space and at the local level, beginning in New York City, and much of my career being really here in my hometown, here in Washington, D.C. And so you'll hear me talk a lot about the local experience because for all of what we do at a national level, ultimately it comes down to what happens locally in our communities, in our neighborhoods. And I often lift up that, you know, as an urban planner, you know, when you try to describe that or what does it actually mean, you know, for me it's always been this definition that, you know, we're here basically to help systems work for the people who live in them, simply put. Whether it's housing, whether it's a financial system, whether it's small business and access to capital, we're all working in systems. And so for me, you know, I was a Lego kid growing up. You know, I like to fix and build and to create possibilities where you see different pieces that you can put together because we're ultimately helping to build communities, right? And so much of my narrative and foundation was actually built here in this city. And so you'll see that often play out in my story and my narrative and perspective. Prior to coming to OFN, for roughly 7.5 years, I ran a CDFI. I'm actually here in DC, the Washington Area Community Investment Fund. It's an organization that I've not only had the pleasure of leading, but for about 10 years while in local government, working in different economic development capacities, I often turned to CDFIs, not quite knowing what the hell they were. That it was just these weird organizations that could move money, but they weren't banks, you know, the larger, you know, institutions that we all know and things. And so I often partnered throughout my economic development career with CDFIs, whether it was banks and some of the MDIs that are here locally to loan funds. And they were always the channels for solutions. That was always the thing that I knew, being in government. And I rose to being an appointed official here in the city, specifically being a small business director, where I knew there was a network of organizations here that I could always turn to for our most pervasive and deep challenges in community. And it was actually a 2015 OFN conference in Detroit, where I first learned about CDFIs. that there was this broader network of organizations across housing, across small business, childcare, and all of these different areas. And frankly, the one experience of that conference is what turned me on in understanding that this is where I wanted my career to be. And the opportunity came up then to be the CEO for WAKIF, and it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down because it was a channel for me to create a new platform for impact here in this city and here in this region. And so for 7 years, I had the opportunity of being there. Our primary focus was around small business, but WAKIF as an institution had a long history in the affordable housing movement here, the cooperative movement here in DC, and much of its earliest investments were actually to be a part of the housing movement. And so not only learning about the organization's history, but again, to me as an urban planner, when we look at the completeness of what we have to have in place in cities for there to be vibrant communities and understanding all the different pieces that are needed, it was always a platform for me to understand the impact of CDFIs. Now, why OFN? The couple things changed for me in 2022, and we spend just a few minutes together. You'll hear me be the doting dad that I am, and show cute pictures of my son. Frankly, my priorities changed. Being an older father and knowing the impact now that I want to have in the world and the legacy, frankly, this opportunity came about that I wasn't quite pursuing, but once it came about, it was an opportunity that I couldn't turn down. Because one, it kept me in the industry. Frankly, working with many of you who I know as friends and many of the folks across the industry where I know the impact of what happens in our communities when we are engaged, it equates to real change. And so it was a kind of impossible sort of thing for me, a job that I love versus an opportunity that I can't turn down, specifically to be in partnership, specifically to be working at a national level in communities with all of you, that frankly was deeply important to me, specifically with the legacy that I want to leave and the world, frankly, that I want to leave for my son. And I know you all feel that same sentiment for our families and the people we care for. And so those are the pieces of the why for me. So we can get into like financing also, but the personal reason why for me is deeply rooted in my family.
And Harold, do you think that CDFIs are an inflection point?
Absolutely. That's part of the excitement. And I think just the points that Michael mentioned, not only of what we're dealing with as a society, our inflection points as an industry are inextricably linked to the inflection points of our country. And so when you look at the times where we've had, whether in cities or regions or at a national level, where we faced our biggest challenges, it's when we as an industry have been called to duty, to do the most, to be the most creative, to be in the trenches of making sure that our communities aren't left behind. We're in one of those moments now, and it's hard often to know that you're in an inflection point when you're experiencing the inflection point. But I think it's worth noting and continuing to lift up, like all the points that you mentioned, Michael, these are like generational things that are happening in such a short, condensed period of time that we're all working through, right? And so we're at an inflection point, absolutely, because the country is as well.
You're right. Sometimes you don't know until you're looking back.
Absolutely.
Shaun, I'm sure you're a stranger to this group. They don't know very much about you. But tell us a little bit brought you to your current role and your reflections on the CDFI industry right now.
Yeah, so I am a rookie compared to Michael. I'm a grizzled veteran as well. I stopped last week counting in weeks. I'm now 2 months in as of last week at Enterprise Community Partners. But for me, I am coming home to Enterprise. And what I mean by that is I started my career at, I would say, a different inflection point. I went to work in 1995 for the Community Preservation Corporation, CPC, actually wrote the application for CPC to become a CDFI 27 years ago. So the reason I went to CPC was that as I was a student, actually an architecture student and a housing student, I really started to understand the ways in which local community development corporations were changing the landscape of neighborhood redevelopment of our cities, and the increasing voice of communities, of folks like Yolanda Garcia at Nos Quedamos, or Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood, who helped to create the Nehemiah program, which CPC financed, really began to change the way we thought about who had power, who had voices in their communities. And that's what I wanted to do. And I went to work to CPC to support that. And I heard about this remarkable guy named Bill Fry, who was organizing tenants in the North Bronx, and went to work with Enterprise. And this idea of the power of CDFIs, the power of intermediaries, to build upon what was happening in communities, to bring capital, to bring technical assistance, for me was kind of the formative experience of my career. And that's what Enterprise is, right? That's how we were founded by Jim Rouse 40 years ago. And that is fundamentally, we're a lot bigger. We had to do a lot more things. We're obviously a big CDFI, but we lend, if you include Bellwether, $10 billion a year. We have almost 14,000 affordable apartments. We're the biggest nonprofit owner and manager here in this region. And we're the biggest both policy and advocacy organization at the national level, but also in the markets that we're in across the country. So it's grown to be a remarkable platform, but rooted in that original vision that Jim Rouse had. And that's the vision that brought me to Enterprise as a partner originally, and now to be CEO. I think the other thing about that experience that I would say, though, is what got me into housing was that I was growing up at a different inflection point. I watched my hometown of New York. I watched neighborhoods literally burning at that point. Massive white flight, disinvestment, and we were talking at that point about the death of the American city. You think about an inflection point. That was an inflection point. And I do think I agree with the point about the inflection point this country is at. Both of what you've said about, whether it's the Supreme Court decisions, whether it's about post-COVID, post-George Floyd. What I would say, to be a little more specific, is in 30 years of working on these issues, I've never seen the housing affordability issues this bad. And it is not just that we had the biggest rent increases literally since we started keeping records during COVID, 18% national year-over-year increase in rent. We also have a housing affordability problem that is everywhere in this country. And I think one of the things I'd love to come back and talk about is what's the opportunity that this moment gives us, because housing affordability is now a national issue in a way that it hasn't been. But if you look at the number of our neighbors that are sleeping on the streets right now, if you look at the depth of the challenges, I've really never seen it at this level of crisis. And with office vacancies, we are asking ourselves again whether this is a moment where our cities may be dying. And I think CDFI's, the call for us is to say, how do we take the incredible work that we've done and scale it to the scale of the challenge that we're facing right now?
I think that's right.
This is one of our breaks?
It may be. I'm blinded by the light, but I feel like perhaps it is.
Buzz
Yes?
waving to us?
Yes, yes, it is. Thank you. Annie, we promise I'll start with you next.
Good morning, everybody. It is my pleasure this morning to introduce Senator Ben Cardin, the senior senator from the great state of Maryland. First elected to the Senate in 2006, Senator Cardin currently serves as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and is the former chair of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, where he still serves. He also serves on the Finance Committee and the Environment and Public Works Committee. A true champion of small businesses, Senator Cardin helped write the Paycheck Protection Program that has helped small businesses in Maryland and nationwide weather the economic repercussions of COVID-19. He also created the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, EIDL, Advanced Grant Program to quickly get cash in the hands of small businesses. He has made it a priority to find better ways to provide access to credit for qualified small businesses and entrepreneurs, particularly minority, women-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. But it's through his role on the Senate Finance Committee where he has been among the foremost leaders in the Senate in supporting community and economic development. He's the lead sponsor on legislation to make permanent the New Markets Tax Credit. He is the lead sponsor on the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which would create a new tax credit for developing and rehabilitating single-family homes in distressed communities. And he is a co-sponsor of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which would enhance and expand the low-income housing tax credit. He will sadly be retiring from the Senate at the end of next year, but he will be leaving behind a tremendous legacy of success in supporting small businesses and championing critical community and economic development initiatives. Please join me in welcoming Senator Ben Cardin.
Matt, thank you very much for that very generous and kind introduction. My apologies to the panel, and I mean that sincerely. I'm going to blame the Secretary of Transportation in Maryland for the road delays coming in from Baltimore. But it's really great to be here, and I will not take too much of your time. We have hearings that start at 10 o'clock on the Hill, so I need to get back to the Hill. But I really, two reasons I wanted to be here. One, there is a Marylander that I want to acknowledge and thank, and Buzz Roberts, for everything he has done for the state. He's been your extraordinary leader, and we're very proud to have him as a Marylander. And I know something about making decisions to retire from your current position. So I really wanted to share, because I think Buzz's story is really dramatic and remarkable, and to share it with my colleagues and with the American public with a congressional record citation. So Buzz, if you'll come forward, I'm going to give you a copy of this.
So much. That is so kind of you. You're so gracious.
I just wanted you to know, since he was leaving, there was no way I was staying in the United States Senate. It's just too difficult. And the second reason I wanted to be here is just to underscore the importance of this discussion. There's a lot of things going on around the world. A war in Ukraine, now a war in Gaza. We have seen the Biden administration pay a great deal of attention to foreign policy as well as domestic policy. Major bills have been passed under the Biden administration to deal with our infrastructure. We've seen that with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, to deal with the challenges of climate change and prescription drug costs by the Inflation Reduction Act. This Friday is Veterans Day, and we passed the PACT Act to help our veterans deal with those issues. The Safer Communities Act dealt with the challenges of gun safety and mental health, particularly in our schools. And the list goes on and on and on. The American Rescue Plan dealing with the pandemic. But we have not dealt with affordable housing. It is in crisis. I heard some of your comments as I was walking in, and I'll just underscore the circumstances. Almost 50% of renters are cost insecure, which means they have to choose between having a place for their family, a house, or having food on the table. We have in Maryland alone 140,000 shortages in affordable housing. Maryland, one of the wealthiest states and one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We have a crisis. We have record low numbers of housing available in our community. So we need to do something about it. And here's the challenge. Over my lifetime, I've seen a constant decline of direct support by government for affordable housing in the budgets. Instead, we've transferred over to the tax side to provide the major incentives. So we have to maximize the political realities of where we can get help for affordable housing. And yes, I am a strong supporter of the low-income housing tax credit and the improvements that are being made there. But it doesn't fill the gap. It's not enough. I see in the affordable housing projects in my own state that you got to combine several areas of help in order to make progress. So yes, I am a strong supporter of the historic tax credits. That helps. That helps a great deal. Just had some announcements in Baltimore in regards to historic tax credits. New market tax credits need to be made permanent. I thank Senator Daines for being my partner on that. That's bipartisan to make that permanent so that we get predictability. Okay, we're okay through next year, but how do you start planning when you know how Congress responds so often after the deadline, not before? How do you get investors interested in projects if you don't have that certainty? We need to do that. And the tax credit I am very excited about are the new homes tax credits that would provide home ownership in areas where we have an appraisal gap. Appraisal gap where it is more expensive to remodel or redo a home or to buy a home in that community or build a home in that community than the community can afford. It provides what we call a credit for the appraisal gap. And I want to thank initially Senator Portman when he was in the United States Senate for being my partner, bipartisan. Now Senator Young picking up the baton to move that forward. Why the home ownership tax credits are so, why these neighborhood home credits are so important, it strengthens neighborhoods. It helps in what, again, I heard very little of your panel, but we're seeing neighborhoods in crisis today. This strengthens neighborhoods. It also deals with one of the major gaps we have in America called the wealth gap, by allowing individuals to be able to own a home, afford a home, and build some wealth. All these are just positive developments of what we need to do in order to deal with the realities and politics of what we can do today to help with affordable housing. And then let me mention one other issue. November 17th is approaching. Another government shutdown threat. This is embarrassing, dangerous, costly, and ridiculous. We've got to have the predictability of our budgets. And I'm going to give a plug for the United States Senate. Not because I'm just a member of the United States Senate, but we're doing something that we need to do. We're working together, Democrats and Republicans. All 12 of the appropriation bills have been passed by overwhelming majorities in the Appropriations Committee in the United States Senate, unlike the House of Representatives, that it's operating on a partisan line that will never reach the finish line. We don't have time for that. And it's interesting, the one bill that we passed on the floor of the United States Senate, because you know appropriation bills are House bills, and we don't have as many vehicles to do it in the Senate, because of the constitutional provisions that have been interpreted by the House very broadly of where bills have to originate. I felt they were right when I was in the House, but no longer do I think they're right. But the HUD bill that passed provides $6 billion for housing, gives us the predictability. The House bill, unlike the Senate bill, has cuts in it that's unrealistic, does not comply with the agreements reached between Speaker McCarthy and President Biden. We need to get serious about passing a full year's appropriation bill. Government shutdown is dangerous, as I said before. A continuing resolution is a failure, but at least keeps government open. We need to pass the full year appropriation bills at the levels that are very difficult, but at least give us hope that there'll be light at the end of the tunnel in regards to the programs that are critically important to Americans. So I just really wanted to come by and tell you, we're going to do this, we're going to continue the fight. We thank you for your imagination. Thank you for your creativity. Thank you for having confidence. We're going to figure out a way to give you a stronger government partnership. We thank the private sector for what they do as partners in this. We've got to deal with this crisis. And I hope that we will have the political support in our system for an initiative for affordable housing in America, broader than just one tax bill, but a policy like we've done in so many other areas to try to deal with the challenges we have in America. In the meantime, thank you for your confidence. I look for, unlike Buzz, I have another year left, so I'm going to be with you for 14 more months. I look forward to getting into, as my colleague, my former colleague, John Lewis would say, let's get into some good trouble and let's get some things done. Thank you all very much.
All right, well, we will continue. Annie, you're up. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to La Raza and your reflections on the CDFI inflection point.
Sure. Well, I want to thank you for having me. And also, I just want to take a moment. I know Buzz is speaking with the senator, but I joined this field in 1990. And one of the first people I met was Buzz Roberts. And the journey is just not going to be the same, Buzz, without Buzz Roberts by our sides. And I just want to acknowledge you. You're a quiet force and a loud one when you need to be, but always there. So thank you, Buzz. I'm going to start with the inflection point and work backward because I feel like the vibe is moving us in this direction. We are at an inflection point, but like I said, I joined the field before it was kind of a field in 1990. So I didn't come from another pathway except that I started as a Peace Corps volunteer. And one of the things you learn as a Peace Corps volunteer when you're coming from the United States of America and you get plunked down into a rural spot in a country that doesn't have many resources is that everything you've been taught about what the world is wrong. So what did I know about surviving in a rural fishing village in the Caribbean? And what was I expected to impart when the people there were the ones who knew how to survive? And then I had to kind of figure my way through that and what could I do to be of value to a community that already had very rich social capital, which is true of all the communities that we work in. And so that was when I formulated my ideas about injustice and economic mobility and privilege. And from there, I caught the bug to work to try to break down those systems, because these are all systems, as we've talked about. And so when I came back, I set about the process of doing that and been working in the CDFI field in this space at Capital Impact Partners, which is now Momentous, running the CDFI fund, serving in the Obama administration, spending several years at LISC. And then, so what brought me to Raza Development Fund really was first and foremost that RDF is a support corporation to Unidos US, formerly the National Council. So when many of us got our start, it was the National Council of Raza. And since that time, the Latino community has grown to be, as we know, 1 in 5 Americans is Latino. Guess what? The future is brown in America. And so the privilege to put my skills to work for a civil rights and advocacy agenda is a great privilege and, connects the rest of my work. I think that, as our communities go, so goes the nation. And, I feel like the CDFI field has always been at an inflection point. Remember, what we did in the pandemic. Remember what we did in the Great Recession. Remember what we did after Hurricane Katrina. Remember, and on and on. And now we do find ourselves in a place at a time. Remember what we did in the wake of George Floyd. And now we are living in the backlash. And it's a great time for us to step up and step in and to really show our muscle, which we've, I think, accumulated a fair amount of muscle over the past 30 years. And it's time for us to exercise that with even greater diligence and care, and to really remember that our work is intersectional, and to create scale at the same time that you are staying in connection with community. You can't just pull one lever. You've got to be pulling the policy levers. At the same time, we're working on housing. We have to be working on health and economic mobility and home ownership and all those things, because people don't live in silos. They live their lives, and those are intersectional.
That intersectionality, I think, is something that we maybe have taken for granted a little bit, but it is so critical that we strengthen that muscular connection with CDFIs in communities and how they function. One of the major levers that we've relied on for 30 years is the Community Reinvestment Act. And I know we're going to spend some time a little bit later this afternoon dissecting that, but we would be remiss if we didn't get this panel's early reflection. So Shaun, I'm going to start with you. It's recently out. I know you've probably spent nights reading all 700 some pages, but what are your sort of early reflections, and what do you hope for?
Yeah, it does make good bedtime reading. I've been on the road a lot as a new CEO. Look, first of all, what I would say is adding my recognition and thanks to Buzz, the role that NAAHL played in bringing us all together, in making sure that there was a collaborative process to put comments in and to make sure we could move the proposed regulation to a better place. I just want to recognize, Buzz, your role and NAAHL's role in doing that enormously. And while we still are working our way through all the specifics, I would say a couple things. I think we all, and Enterprise as a leader of the Action Coalition and others, we're watching this very closely. I think we are pleased that there were a number of comments and inputs that were reflected. I think the equal balance between the retail and the community development tests is important, and I think from my perspective, the specificity in the community development language, both in terms of what the activities are, the ways in which affordable housing is specifically defined, were both positives from our point of view. I think the big question mark and concern at this point is, given the changes around the tax credit and other specific investment vehicles, and I should say, in a world where we've now created, through the Inflation Reduction Act and a set of other tools, a potentially massive set of new tax credits, there is real uncertainty about where that will go. And so, from our perspective, what we'd like to do is to build a movement with help from folks in this room to say that banks, particularly those that have outstanding ratings, should make a commitment to at least maintain, if not grow, their investments in those community development tools, but specifically the credit, for at least the first year, because there's going to be uncertainty. And it is moments like these that can really have negative impacts, these transitional moments. And so we believe that kind of commitment of stability and even increasing investment at this moment is a really important step that banks can take.
Yeah, I like that call to action. Michael, what about from LISP perspective? What are you hoping for? What are your early reflections on the regulation?
Sure. So I echo the comments about the retail and community development balance there. We think that that's important. I guess what I would also add is that it was encouraged to see that the investment test remained an important component, particularly for financial institutions, FIs that are greater than 10 billion in asset size. When you consider that the majority of the financial institutions in our country are really, frankly, less than $1 billion in asset size, the opportunity to collaborate, I think, as a CDFI list, as an organization, and obviously these organizations, partnering with larger financial institutions, those that are greater than 10 billion, I think is important in order for us to be able to drive the overall economic development that we ultimately want to see happen across the country and within communities. Perhaps even another area that I would say remains important is that when you look at the CDFI component and being able to count their loans as part of all of their loans as part of their portfolio, not just considering those that have been originated during the assessment period. I think that's another critical thing because we fully understand the impact, the gravity of the work that's happening within CDFIs. And the efforts aren't just about the origination at the time, but it's also keeping that customer and being able to care for communities block by block.
As we ground ourselves in community needs and this inflection point, the new regulation, Annie, I wonder if you would reflect on us, how, from your standpoint, how are community needs changing? What are new priorities that we need to be thinking about as we think about now and into the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, I'm not so sure how much community needs have changed. I think what people want is to have they want to send their kids to good schools. They want upward mobility. They want stability. They don't want to be evicted. They want to be able to pay their rent or buy a home. They want the same things we all want, and I don't think that that's changed so much. I think the environment continuously gets harder. We talked about the burden of housing, and you know, I think we've talked a little bit about power structures and the importance. And I think the reason our work is important to be connected with broader agendas is that we have to shake up the formula for folks so that, you know, your zip code is not predictive of your outcomes in life. And those are the kinds of things that we're trying to intercede on. And I think the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and the programs in the IRA, you know, with the Justice 40 lens, that's potentially a huge game changer for us, because never before has it been acknowledged that there's a structural problem, that if we don't take a structural solution like Justice 40, if we don't put that overlay on it, the resources aren't going to go where they most need to go. So this is a really, really important moment for us to get it right. And for us to get it right, we have to stay attuned to what folks in communities are saying. Otherwise, we as CDFIs, we intermediate. So we often get our resources. The loudest voice in our ears often is our funders, right? And so we have to make sure we are keeping room for the voices in community and connecting those. And we have a great testing ground right now in front of us.
Yeah, elevating that resident voice really speaks to me, and keeping alignment. Harold, I'm wondering, in your seat as head of OFN, what you're hearing from your members in terms of changing needs or priorities at the community level, and how they're responding to that.
Yeah, I think the point that Annie noted, that's exactly where I would have started. I don't believe necessarily that our needs are shifting. They're more pervasive and persistent. You know, I think as we come out of these last couple of years, The one thing that kind of comes to mind, for me is the level of or lack of predictability, that for any of us we want within our respective communities. That we know we can afford childcare, that we know we can afford gas, that we have affordable housing, so we know that we have predictability in how we care for our families, right? And so to me, there's a level of predictability that persists with this state of vulnerability that we have now because of this intersectionality. Like, there's so many issues we're trying to tackle along the affordability spectrum that is reflective of what we've been dealing with over the last number of years. But I think even to some of the points that you mentioned, Shaun, the levels at which we're dealing with issues now, they're greater. But I don't know that we would add any new categories necessarily, with the exception of one. And this is, and Annie opened the door a bit to this, and just I always like to crystallize it with these type of forums now. From 1980 to 2022, on average, there were $8 billion worth of climate-related disaster costs to our communities. $8 billion. 2023 alone, this year, through 10 months, we're at $24 billion worth of impact in our communities. Indiscriminate of, whether it's an LMI community or coastal community or Midland, we're talking about the entire country, and this is just the United States. And so when we begin to put into perspective this notion of predictability, not in an instant having your home destroyed or flooded, that's what we're working towards, or what we need to be working towards. And so the climate issue and the climate crisis is one that we have to have as a front level priority for what we do as an industry. And if you were at the OFN conference a couple weeks ago, I made a call for all CDFIs to embrace 100% of what we do, a climate lens on that, because whether we're focused on small business or housing or any other category of investment right now, it pales in comparison to the immediate destruction in the instant that we can experience, that if we don't change what we do right now, and we carry the burden, unfortunately, of being the champions and making sure that our communities aren't left behind. And so, to me, this notion of predictability in our communities is an important one, because we all want to make sure that, and just one point, just before I get to that, is one thing of us focusing on the future, but we're talking about like tomorrow, what can happen in any one of our communities, right? So it's one thing of us ensuring that, we're meeting, housing needs and all of those things. We have to often work in the space of and in our space, right? That we're focused on affordable housing opportunities, home ownership opportunities, preservation, and we need to be focused on climate and the impact of our projects, our investments, and all of what we do.
No, I think that's incredibly helpful and a great reminder. It's just, it's a different way for us to think about our work, but it's a critical way. As we think about the future and what we're dealing with, I often think about challenges and opportunities and how we're responding to those. So let's start with challenges, and then we'll get to opportunities. We've talked a little bit about them. But Michael, are there any other challenges of our work that we need to acknowledge and really start to attack that we haven't already discussed?
Sure. Well, perhaps just one nuance that I would add to what's already been thoughtfully said is that the current economic environment, we've seen unprecedented interest rate hikes that have become a paradigm shifter in terms of home ownership and affordability. Mm-hmm. When we consider small businesses and the cost of goods, services within those small businesses and their ability to sustain, operate in a rising interest rate and high cost environment. Those have all been things that I think within the CDFI world we have to be conscious about and consider it in terms of how we help bring public and private partnerships together to ultimately support the communities that are important across our nation. Again, thinking about home ownership and the ability to be able to get everyday Americans into that first home. The affordability factor today is much different than it would have been just even 2 years ago. And of course, as I said, for small businesses, we continue to hear the voice, and their posts suggest that in this higher cost environment, it's very difficult for them to survive. So we'll have to stay focused there.
Homeownership is probably the hardest it's been in 2 decades, frankly,
Yes.
in this country. Shaun, what other challenges should we put on the table as we think about the next several years?
Michael's exactly right, that the interest rate environment is making it more difficult to do everything that we're doing. But combining that with Harold's point, we've seen in our own asset management portfolio, our own portfolio of housing we own in this region, massive increases in insurance costs. And some of that is climate related.
Climate related.
Some of that, frankly, is redlining. When insurance companies are asking whether you accept vouchers when they're deciding what your rates are, it says something, right? And so this is an enormous challenge. And at the same time, and I mentioned this earlier, I think the levels of homelessness that we're seeing, family homelessness, chronic and street homelessness, is of deep, deep concern to me. Partly, it's personal. I started volunteering in a homeless shelter in college, worked at the National Coalition for the Homeless as an intern, and led the National Homelessness Strategy as HUD Secretary, where we made remarkable progress. This is a solvable problem. We cut family and chronic homelessness by 1/3 in this country. We cut veteran homelessness in half. We had 100 places that ended veteran homelessness. So it is a solvable problem. But what I am worried about is that through a confluence of factors, massive rent increases, a class of drugs, fentanyl and others that are deeply addictive, a whole set of issues. What we're seeing, and I've been in 15 cities since I started 2 months ago. I was just on Skid Row in LA. It's not just that this is a humanitarian and moral crisis. It's that people are increasingly losing faith that these are solvable problems, that government can make a difference. And specifically, when you hear in California, we passed billions of dollars of housing bonds, why are people sleeping on our streets? We have a crisis that is, I think we all, as CDFIs, as investors, we have to think about. And then to put those two pieces together, you asked for the challenges. I've got some opportunities, and I want to be an optimist in places too. But what I'm worried about is that we are seeing serious pressure on affordable housing providers writ large, where the numbers just don't work on the ground between all of these cost increases, especially insurance. And the tip of the spear is supportive housing. We are losing supportive housing providers. They are going under. And I am concerned that if we can't come together as an industry, as a movement, and make some progress on insurance and some of these other issues, we're going to have a serious crisis on our hands in terms of just preserving the housing we have, much less building more.
Building what we need. I'm going to stop you there. We're going to take another little pause and invite our next very important person.
It's not supposed to be a test in flexibility, but we certainly appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nikki Holsopple, and I am the CRA officer at JPMorgan Chase. We are so proud to sponsor today's events. It is a great privilege today that I invite our senator from the state of Indiana, Todd Young, to the stage. He has been a senator since 2016 and a great friend to NAAHL and a supporter of affordable housing. The senator actually serves on several U.S. Senate committees, including Finance, Foreign Relations, Commerce, Science, and Transportation, as well as Small Business and Entrepreneurship. He has been the leading Republican and shown willing to work across the aisle on shared issues, including for Neighborhood Homes Investment Act and Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. His schedule is incredibly busy, and we really appreciate working with the agenda to meet his time. So without further ado,
Well, thank you, Nikki. Thank you for that introduction. And I think everyone here is not excited about all sorts of prepared remarks. I have some. I'm going to run through them quickly just to give you sort of the wave points, as we say in the Navy. But I'm going to compress it so that you have an opportunity to ask a few questions, if you like, about what we're working on the Hill. But before I dive into that, I'm really here to thank Buzz Roberts for his lifetime of leadership. Yes. There he is. Buzz, take a bow. This is it. This is it. Thank you. Thanks for your lifetime of leadership, and I just came to acknowledge you.
Well, thank you, Senator.
You can offer remarks if you like.
I know your time is limited, and people would rather hear from you. So,
Okay.
but thank you.
Very good. This is why he's a professional. Okay. All right. So, listen, finding housing solutions remains one of my top priorities. We, of course, have high rents, high mortgage rates. It's eating a lot out of the incomes of rank-and-file Hoosiers, to say nothing of other Americans. This was not the number 1, 2, 3, or 8 issue on my agenda when I ran for the Senate, I have to say. But then I launched a tour. We called it our Fair Shot Tour, to give everyone a fair shot at success in life. I know it sounds a little hokey, but we learned a lot, and this is one of the things that came up time and again. So this is now a very top issue on my agenda. Families across my state are having to, of course, spend out of their household budget for rent, for mortgage payments. Local leaders and employers, they're concerned about the implications for their hometowns, communities everywhere. You know this. This is what sort of led Senator Cardin and I to partner on the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. I had been walking through, as a member of Congress, 2011 to 2017, walking through a number of neighborhoods, but disproportionately what would, I think, fairly be characterized as left behind neighborhoods or distressed neighborhoods. And I was like, you know, how do we unlock the capital to fix up some of these oftentimes beautiful, strikingly beautiful older structures, so that we can fix them up and improve the property value, not just of those properties, but those around them. All of you are familiar with this dynamic, but the numbers just didn't work. The numbers would not work. Even the tear down costs oftentimes were prohibitive. So that's what the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act is designed to address. It's to address that gap between cost of acquisition, cost of fixing it up, and then whatever you can, in the end, sell that house for. We have tailored this so that the legislation, it's a tax credit that would be offered. This would be available to owner-occupants as well as third parties. And this is getting a lot of attention. If there are any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer them. We would, in the end, after implemented over a 10-year period, have 500,000 additional homes rebuilt or substantially rehabilitated, $125 billion of total development activity. Over 850,000 jobs would be created in construction and construction-related industries. In light of our workforce, I'm not sure that's a good thing, but nonetheless, some real exciting opportunities would probably have to be paired with some reforms in other areas of public policy to make it all work. I acknowledge that. Another legislative priority is the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. We Republicans reformed the tax code a number of years ago. One of the unintended consequences of that was to make less valuable the existing credits. Senator Cantwell and I want to not only improve the administration of the low-income housing tax credit program in various ways, but more importantly, make more generous the credit. so that proven and bipartisan initiative can continue, and we can more closely fulfill all the demand that's out there. And then the last bill it's just a reporting bill, but I actually think it could be the most transformative in the entire sort of constellation of housing bills being considered on Capitol Hill right now, being considered for generations. I know that sounds overwrought, but the Yes in My Backyard Act, YIMBY, yes, thank you. We just want land use policies, zoning policies to be developed in a hyper-transparent way. To me, that means that if you're not in the practice of always going to the local zoning board meetings or watching your closed-circuit television local government channel, meaning if you're not a government nerd like me, just maybe we can come up with ways to bring more light to the process, be more inclusive, and ensure that people are held more accountable for bad land use policy. Some of this is just an inherent sort of status quo bias we all have, including local officials, when it comes to just saying, okay, we have a zoning policy, let's just keep that zoning policy. If it's not broken, if I'm not hearing about it, let's not try and fix it, which is the worst thing you can do across many geographies when we're having housing affordability issues. There is a problem. People may not know what the root of that problem is, but you need to report to the federal government, from whom you receive all sorts of money in terms of grants. If you want to remain eligible for those grants, let us know why you are drafting certain zoning policies or land use policies that historically have either been discriminatory against certain types of individuals or have been significant drivers of housing costs. So we've got about 15 different areas. There's no gotcha, but and we're quite clear. If you don't do it, you don't get the money. That's it. And I'm shocked that we haven't had more sort of vocal opposition to this yet, but we haven't. We've got the Cato Institute on the right. We've got the Progressive Policy Institute on the left, and we need more people in the center to start vocalizing their support for this, because I think it could be transformative. But with that, I'll open it up if any time remains.
Do you have time for one?
Yes.
We have a question?
One always puts the pressure on me, because if I don't do a great job with one, so maybe I'll do two very quickly.
Senator, just thank you so much for your support of the Neighborhood Homes Bill, of the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act.
Yes, sir.
You didn't even mention your work on social determinants of health, the intersection between health and housing, which you've been a leader on.
I did not, but you did. Thank you.
So thank you for that. And that was my question. Thank you. No, I would just say
Next planning question.
what's your predictions on getting a a tax bill across the finish line this year, and getting both of your big priorities, HCIA and neighborhood homes, part of that package?
I think we'll have a tax title. We almost always have a tax title as we approach year's end. There's all kinds of expiring provisions, and there, in addition to housing, there's some high priority other issues that have been simmering for a couple of years and not received attention. One is the research and development provisions in our tax code. Those need to be restored. There's a very vocal and organized constituency pressing for that. You should be cheering for them, because if you lay that predicate of getting their provisions addressed, then that's a tax title, right? And you can kind of ride on that, or vice versa. You also have a child tax credit, which it needs to be right-sized. It's expensive, but it's also effective if well-tailored to reduce or even eliminate child poverty in this country. So, and there's some bipartisan support for that. So those two provisions, in addition to the housing priorities we have, lead me to believe that you are going to get a tax title probably at a year-end bill. You just need to make sure that I need to help make sure that we're in the mix when it comes to housing priorities, and I think we'll be there. I don't have much more to say, even though I just spent about 5 minutes saying it. All right, thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day. Secretary. Good to see you.
All right, well, we were talking about challenges, and we talked about how difficult homeownership rate is given, opportunities given the interest rate. We talked about insurance. We talked about climate. Let's talk about opportunity.
Before we go there.
Yes.
Can I just add one?
Absolutely.
The one that scares me the most is the truth and the challenge of our narrative in America and where the truth stands in that. Because I feel like all of these other problems are solvable. We can solve them. But if we don't all agree on the same truth, on the same facts, that's the thing that scares me the most. Now I'm ready for opportunities.
Because we didn't have enough challenges already.
Exactly.
Quite a list of
Because
challenges.
all those other ones were solvable.
Yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, all right, so we have our list of challenges. There have to be some opportunities. So I'm going to start with you, and
Sure.
we'll work our way down. Opportunities?
I think that opportunities abound, actually. I've just spent the last 15 months deep in the Latino community, and there is no community that is more optimistic about the future than Latinos, even though, the community faces so many barriers. I think that just the belief in the American dream and the promise of America and our more perfect union, the sentiment is strong, and I think that once we come around to tapping back into that, that is what is going to save us. That said, I think there are lots of opportunities in front of us that are made of crisis. So the climate crisis is also an opportunity for us to tackle that in a way that addresses the inequities that are at its root. And I'll stop there and leave room for my other panelists.
Shaun, opportunities?
Yeah, just building on Annie's point, and I will say this as a former federal budget director, I'm a little jealous, but we've had a New Deal go through Congress in the last few years. $4 trillion between 4 pieces of legislation. And, after we lick our wounds a little bit in the housing and community development community that we didn't get, the Build Back Better provisions that were directly focused on housing, if we pick our heads up, there are massive opportunities through that legislation to invest in our priorities. Climate is obviously one of them, and I think from my perspective, what's interesting about this moment is you can now see a future, might be 5 years from now, it might be 10, it might be 20 years from now, where energy costs will be lower in this country. We will be able to produce renewable at utility scale. In local communities, there are days already where California is producing more renewable energy than it actually uses. And for me, the question isn't whether that future will happen, whether we're going to have lower cost energy and real opportunity to lower utility bills. Our estimates are it's about $3,000 for the average household that you could lower costs annually. The real question, is it only going to be wealthy people in wealthy communities that are driving electric cars, that have closed their fossil fuel power plants, or is this revolution going to come to the communities that we all work in? And for me, that is one of the challenges of this moment. And I was enormously proud. I will say, we've got skin in this game. Even before Michael had started, called him. We formed a partnership between LISC and Enterprise and Habitat, Rewiring America, United Way. We went to get $9.5 billion of greenhouse gas reduction funding. A lot of our competition is CDFIs, too. And that's, while we want to win, I'm enormously proud that there is the scale in this movement to be able to do this. Sadie McEwen's right here in the front row. Climate United put in a remarkable application, the Climate Justice Fund. And so, Accordi, there is a real opportunity here to benefit housing, to benefit low-income communities that I think if we miss it, shame on us.
Shame on us. And I think there is a lot of opportunity. I think one of the challenges with the opportunity is how do we make CDFIs, housing providers, known to the Department of Energy, to EPA as real partners in this, and with boots on the ground to really deploy this money.
But we have that, and I think it's interesting. The person running the greenhouse gas reduction application is a former HUD employee, right? I think there is a deep understanding that if you want to move equity, to Annie's earlier point, if you want to do this in a way that really focuses on Justice 40 communities, housing is the best way, and community development are the best way to do it. But I also think we shouldn't just stop there.
No.
There's massive investment in broadband. If you think about any of the lessons out of COVID, we know that your kids won't learn, you won't be able to work in many jobs, you won't get the health care you need if you don't have high-speed and affordable broadband. Huge opportunity, and that is a housing-based opportunity. That's a community-based opportunity that we all are well positioned. So there's a whole set of things in this kind of New Deal moment that I think we all can be focused on, and we're gonna have to, the government's done its job, right? We gotta go make this happen on the ground.
Right. Harold, other opportunities you want to throw into the mix?
Absolutely. This is frankly part of the reason why I'm here. During the before times, pre-COVID, you know, it was a bit of a challenge running a CDFI where I felt like I had to not only carry the banner, but help folks understand these things called CDFIs are great organizations that, you know, and so I got into a point, frankly, during those before times where it's like, all right, I'll say we got this designation, that we do these wonderful things, and I'll keep the party going, keep moving on with my pitch to investors and funders and those sort of things. Now is a bit different. I think what we've done over the last number of years is one, to prove again, because I think to Annie's points earlier, at every crisis we face as a country, it was this industry, you know, that stepped in over the last 30, 40 years, 50 years, right? And so to me, there's a bit of a different moment now where we're no longer proving that we can. The question now is how far can we go? And I think that's a very important distinction in what we do and what we articulate now as an industry that, you know, for me coming into OFN, I'm not proving anything or trying to make a justification on our value or worth. We've done that. And that's a point, a posture difference that I think we can celebrate as an industry because we have the bona fide proof of knowing what we've done over the years, right? And so we do face now this next phase, this evolution of excitement where we could and should be focused on the opportunity that's available to us. Our central focus as we move forward, and thank you for the tee up, frankly, Marietta, because it's going to be indicative of where we're going as an organization. Our audience is a bit different. One clarifying point, that for OFN, our audience are all of you. As CDFIs, you're on the ground in communities. We're not. We're here to support you all, to support our members, to support the industry, and we're clear on that. Now, we do that because of our impact in community, but our ultimate objective is to make sure that CDFIs have greater resources, that we're influencing policy in the political environment so that we have frameworks in place that are supportive of getting capital to all of you. And so when we look at, just coming back to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, I agree, Shaun. Shame on us if we are not able to, at this moment in time, I know our team worked very hard, as many others did, to make sure that community lenders were at the center of this legislation. $27 billion, and this is only one program, right, of what's come down the last couple of years. For us, the objective is going to be to make sure, no matter who applied for what, no matter what the approach is and was, that the most amount of resources possible are getting to the organizations that we have 100% and firm belief are going to make sure that resources are getting into our respective communities. And so that, for us, is a posture where how we partner, as we'll be going into a new strategic planning environment coming in 2025, that's going to look very different from where we were before because OFN is in a very different position. It's not just that the industry has gone through an inflection point. We've reached over $1 billion in total assets now. Our staff is bigger and stronger than it's ever been. As an organization, our membership is even bigger, right? And so for me, it couches this opportunity. The burden is on us to be thinking in the most creative and ambitious ways that we possibly can about the agenda forward, and making sure that we're leveraging resources where they are, whether within the public sector or private sector, that we're thinking differently about the partners we're bringing to the table. One last very quick point. As it relates to federal resources, one agenda item that we do have is actually in response to what you teed up there, Marietta, and Shaun, you hit on this too, that our charge and our team has already been gearing up to make sure that we're going beyond the CDFI fund, that we're going beyond Treasury, and identifying partnerships so that those agencies know if you have capital opportunities and that you're experiencing choke points of getting that capital into communities, then we're your partner to help connect with CDFIs. But we're taking a broader lens now across the federal government to work with agencies to make sure that they know they have partners on the ground.
I don't know if you have other opportunities. I have another question for you, but I want to give you the opportunity to put.
I'll be brief. I would just say, having spent now a little over 11 years in the CDFI space, one of the things that's most evident is that CDFIs are financial first responders. We help communities navigate through really tough times and ultimately help them get to positions that they can thrive. Perhaps what I would offer as an opportunity is the ongoing need for public and private sector to continue working together. While sitting here, I reflected on a conversation I had during my time at Carver shortly before transitioning, and a large partner that had been working with us, a Fortune 500 company, the head of Treasury said, "We believe that we've done our work to help with economic development and social justice, and now we're going to be shifting our priorities." And as I was sitting there and I was listening to that conversation and trying to think of a very tactful way to say, bad idea, bad idea, ultimately what it told me is that there are some out there that may look at the issues we've been addressing for the past few years as a moment, when it's not a moment. It is frankly a movement. It has to be part of how we look at public and private partnerships going forward in order to drive economic inclusion and change in our nation. So I think the greatest opportunity is to continue being advocates in that space.
That's an excellent point, because that's the sort of where I wanted to go next. It would be remiss if we didn't affirmatively talk about the roles we play in economic and racial justice, frankly. And I appreciate your point about, you know, there was a series of events that created these moments, but we've been working on these issues for decades. It's just, it's a different kind of conversation now. So yeah, I would like the panel's reflections on how we leverage the moment to really create lasting change in communities and in our structures. So I'll start with you and then we can work our way down.
Sure. So one of the biggest areas where I would say through LISC, our affiliate National Equity Fund, we've worked with developers to this Minority Economic Developers Fund that has allowed more than $147 million of capital to be raised, and I think approximately 11 banks have participated in helping to raise these funds. Helping developers, and many of these, again, developers are minority developers, get access to capital and the opportunity to participate in affordable housing creation, the opportunity to get involved in building capacity and scale on their ends is an example. The overarching point that perhaps I'm highlighting is that where I think we, LISC and other CDFIs play a very important role, is seeking opportunities to serve as a conduit, helping, bringing together partnerships, and ultimately addressing the needs. When we think about affordable housing, I'll state the obvious, it's not simply just about building great properties, right, and plopping them in the middle of a desert. We also have to think about the infrastructure. So we've got to be looking at healthy foods, healthcare and social services, education, and organizations like LIST help to ultimately bring all of those kinds of partnerships together that I think help to address the important question you raised.
Harold, your reflections. How do we leverage this moment for lasting change?
Yeah, we're in a precarious period. We often frame it right now, particularly this sort of backlash environment that we're in, coming from where we were with George Floyd a couple of years ago, and Annie, you framed this well, that one topic of mine, just to name it specifically, we're dealing with a legal environment now. That is a bit different, particularly coming out of the affirmative action decisions. That requires us, I think, to be working in a couple different ways. One, I think what we see as needs in our communities, what we see as data, which we can rattle off every measure of health and wealth in our respective communities and communities of color, are last. You name one. You name a region. And so from that vantage point, I think there's a requirement for us to not only continue, but to be intentional about what we lift up, as well about how we invest. Now, the second piece of this, though, gets back to the legal environment, because we do have right now, I think, a legitimate threat of momentum that is moving forward. That's no longer, at the doorstep of our industry, but it's a clear and present danger right now. And I think as we look at now expanding our lens towards, executive branch advocacy to, legislative branch sort of advocacy, that the judiciary now is in our line of sight to understand what movements are taking place and how for the future we need to be positioned as an industry to not only do what we know is right, economically and financially in our communities, but to continue on this path of morally doing what we know is right, because of the history that the reason why we're all here is because we're combating the history of our country. And to Annie's point about, if we can't just simply stay in the truth, it doesn't take away from our greatness as a country, doesn't take away from the wonderfulness of what we present and what we represent in terms of ideals that does give light to the rest of the world. That if we can't address our own truths, that if we can't sit in that and make sure that policy, that makes sure that our investment strategies and approaches are combating issues of the past that are very real and present today, we're going to be in a perpetual state as we move forward, where the racial wealth divide, inequality, the racist elements and impacts in our system are going to be persistent. And they're going to be with us into the future. And so to me, there's an intentionality now of how we have to think about how we advocate, how we message, how we frankly look to influence in very different ways than we have before. And this is something that we're exploring, I know, organizationally, and looking to create different tables where we can pull others together to help us be very intentional about how we move forward. Because there is a momentum that's moving now, and it is a potentially dangerous one if we're not intentional about how we step into combating this moment.
How we talk about it.
And how we talk about it.
Yep. Shaun, your thoughts?
Yeah, eloquent thoughts on this, and obviously we're all grappling with this in very personal ways and in professional ways. What I would say is that while I completely agree with the point that we have to see around corners and anticipate what may happen, we should also remember that we are on very clear legal footing in housing and community development around these issues. So discrimination is illegal in this country. And people who write insurance policies that redline or a whole range of other steps, like those are wrong under any definition, and I don't see as fundamentally at risk, and they are the law of the land. And so we should not shy away from taking on very directly, vocally discriminatory challenges to the communities and the families that we work with. Second, I would also say for housing specifically, whether it's, and I have the scars to bear for this as HUD Secretary, we advanced a disparate impact regulation, which survived to the Supreme Court, 5-4. It is the law of the land, and we have a very strong basis to say you don't have to intentionally discriminate. If there are discriminatory outcomes, that is a basis for being able to have remedies. And affirmatively furthering fair housing is written into our housing laws in this country. And so I think we still, agreeing with Harold about the perils, we should not self-censor here, right? We should not stop doing the things that are right morally where there is current grounding. So
space there, yeah.
Second thing I would just say is I think one of the things that's so powerful about this moment in terms of, to use Annie's words, the systems that we are uncovering is to really be able, as organizations, both externally and internally, take on these issues. What do I mean by that? Enterprise, before I arrived in our most recent strategic plan, made racial equity one of our 3 strategic pillars for everything that we do. And if you look at, Michael mentioned this, I was just in New Orleans. Our Equitable Path Forward initiative, it's a $3.5 billion commitment. We are working, not only providing capital, but technical assistance to BIPOC developers. We went to the Dewdrop Inn, a famous club in Jazz, which is being renovated by a black developer. First of all, the values in that neighborhood because of systemic discrimination are lower, makes it harder to raise capital. The balance sheet that developer has, the equity they have, is lower because they've been developing in those neighborhoods for years, right? And you can go on and on. The neighborhoods are at greater climate risk, and that is true generally for BIPOC communities, low-income communities, because lower value land is where climate risk is higher, right? So all of those systems come together. So we have to be thinking about how do we interrupt those systems in ways that can work against them, and I think there is plenty of legal basis to do that. And finally, we have to think about our own procurement dollars. What services are we using? Who are we hiring? What are the techniques that we're using to hire? Are we getting to a diverse set of schools? And all of those things, I think, are on the table now for us as organizations in ways that they weren't. And for me, that's the opportunity of this moment.
Annie, I'm going to let you have the last word on this.
So last word, and there's a flashing red light back there.
I'm ignoring it, so.
Okay, I will too then. So we are all about access to capital, and access to capital is one of the civil rights issues of our time, which is what this backlash is bringing to the foreground. And when you talk to folks who have been around in this industry for a really long time, they say, what brought you into it? The civil rights movement. And this is back to your first question to me, why RDF? Because we are a support corporation to Unidos US, which is a civil rights and advocacy organization, and it comes full circle. And we've got to, embrace the circle. We've got to come together and stay strong. And we have to get smarter. The moral, I agree with you, these are moral and ethical questions. And also, I understand if it falls on your ears that the law is on our side, it's like the color of law. I mean, it's not just law, right, that breaks these things down. And so we can't just rely on that, but we also have to get smart. These guys are well-funded. They're playing the long game, and they're strategic. And we have to also, in addition to sticking to our knitting, doing our work, sticking together, we have to be smarter than they are, and I think we can. Si se puede.
I would just like to give my sincerest thanks to this incredible panel. I know we're all at events and it's conference season, but I can't think of another powerhouse panel to start off the day. So thank you, Michael, Harold, Shaun, and Annie, for starting our day off. Thank you so much.
Well, you can see why we wanted these guys to set the table for the whole day. Thank you so much, and thanks for your sense of humor and flexibility to accommodate our senators. We have a 15-minute break. We're going to start the next panel promptly at 10:45. This panel has set up that next panel brilliantly. We're going to talk about the climate opportunity. So we'll see you in 15 minutes. And thanks again.